Welcome to episode 5 of Islington Mill and, a podcast series about the cultural life of one of the UK's most beloved artist-led creative centres, Salford's Islington Mill. For episode number 5, I am joined by return guest, the artist and co-director of Islington Mill, Rachel Goodyear, who first appeared on this podcast series when it was still Islington Mill is Queer about a year ago, and you can find that on our archive if you want to give that a listen. If you've been to Islington Mill at any point over the last 2 years, you'll know that this building and the community inside it is changing. There's been a lot of building work going on both of the Islington Mill and new Islington Mill buildings. And recently, the scaffolding that has been outside Islington Mill for over a year now has started to come down, and it feels very much like a bit of a rebirth of Islington Mill. This Friday, the 30th of September, sees the start of a new series of monthly events in Islington Mill called Last Friday, where the mill is going to be opened up to the public for people to see around the space as it's changing and the new developments that are happening here, but also to open the space up to potential artistic collaborations between both the artists who work here and members of the local community. Recently, I was stood in the courtyard smoking a cigarette, talking to Rachel Goodyear about the changes, the ongoing changes, but also the more recent, very physically visible changes that are happening to the mill, with some excitement. And we started talking more in depth about a topic that we had touched upon when Rachel first appeared on Islington Mill is Queer a year ago, and that is the relationship between art and space. I decided to speak to Rachel more in depth on this topic, as I know it's something she's very excited and passionate about, but also it does tie into these Last Friday upcoming events, which are starting this Friday, which should be the day that this podcast goes on air, all going according to plan, touch wood. So with that in mind, I've tentatively called episode 5 of Islington Mill and Art in Space, with special guest, artist and co-director of Islington Mill, Rachel Goodyear, talking to me about the relationship between art and creative practice and both physical and psychological spaces. Rachel Goodyear, artist and co-director of Islington Mill. Welcome back to the Islington Mill podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming on. I think there is a lot for us to talk about, actually. There's been a lot of changes in the mill for the past 2 or so years, but there's been some very kind of particular changes happening here in the last couple of weeks. Could you talk us through what's going on at Islington Mill at the moment, please? Yeah,
well, I think the first thing that you'd notice, which we're all noticing, is that the scaffolding came down from the front of Islington Mill.
Okay.
And so for the first time in quite a while, we actually see all its brickwork and its new windows. Yeah. And also, I think from the front, quite a significant difference is that on the ground floor, there are some windows where you can actually see into the mill from street level for, I think, the first time ever.
First time ever, yeah.
Yeah, which is us inside are feeling very oh wow, everyone can see in.
How does that feel?
It was a little unnerving at first because suddenly you're just like, wow, everyone can see in, but then it's also a few of us we've all been actually just situated ourselves in the ground floor for this past week or so really experiencing what it's like to be in there. And it's great, actually. It's you can be really nosy and see what's going on outside, but also it's like people looking in through the windows. It's a change, and I think I'm getting my head around it, but I'm really excited because it's actually, it does feel like for the first time ever that it's just the mill's actually it's open to people. Yeah. It's like people can actually see in. I know I've had conversations with people that I've met on the street over time that they've lived around here for a really long time and didn't even realise that anything even happened here. Yeah. And I think it's just behind these walls we know how much happens here. So it's really, I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. One of the practical things that has impacted us, because we're here on the 4th floor in our studio, and you're literally next door to us in the next door studio. Well, bar one. And it's let so much light in now that the scaffolding's been taken down and the new windows are in place and the kind of mesh that was covering the scaffolding is gone. It feels so much brighter and lighter in this space. Like the other day when me and Michael came in to do some work, we were just like, what is different? What's going on? Why does it feel bigger? Has somebody moved something? And then we realised that the scaffolding and all that kind of mesh tarp stuff, whatever that is gone, and it suddenly feels, it made the room feel bigger for some reason, even though it hasn't gotten bigger. But
you really notice that difference.
Yeah.
And it's so, I think for us in these spaces, actually, it feels, it feels like we're, we've got our windows back out onto the world again now, and we've actually got windows that we can open without fear of like them falling out.
Yeah, exactly.
And and I think one of like a big difference that I've noticed as well, because it was always really, really surreal being up on the 4th floor, but having like work people like actually at your window, and it's just like, and you don't usually, when you're like above ground level, you don't really expect to sort of see people just walking past your windows.
Yeah, it is weird.
So it was that took a bit of getting used to. Although it's like kind of going to miss it actually, just like that traffic.
Yeah, it was weird and various. When we and my partner lived in various tower blocks over time, it was around the period that they were getting reclad before the Grenfell disaster stuff happened. But it was weird to be like on the top floor, on the 18th floor or whatever. Well, on the 14th floor and on the 9th floor, and just suddenly have somebody walk past. It's weird. It's trippy.
Well, so someone was doing something at the window one day when I came in. And but because there was a piece of furniture that obscured the window ledge, so as I walked in, it actually did look like there was somebody stood in the corner of my room.
Wow.
And I felt like I was
oh my god,
I was just like terrified. Just like a moment of just like sheer just like horror, and it was like, oh no, it's okay. It's just
that'll give you a little adrenaline rush to start off your day.
Yeah, that definitely woke me up.
Like we said, that there's been a lot of changes going on at the mill, and one of the purposes of this podcast is to document that kind of thing and also bring information out to the public. But there's going to be an event here there's going to be a series of events happening over the course of the coming months here at Islington Mill on the last Friday of every month.
Yeah.
Could you take us through what that is?
Yeah, so as the scaffolding's coming down, as windows into the mill are appearing, I think this is where we're also feeling like the mill's waking up again. And I think whilst we were in it's just like in the pandemic, whilst we've been in these these renovation works, it's always been like that. Life never stopped at the mill, but it's almost like the mill in what we know as the mill and what it's been before, and the way that we are. And what that means, and who we are, how we all just like collaborate, and just like cohabit these spaces. I think it's just like that's been we've not been able to do that in a way that's just like we have done in the past. And so I think it's just like, not only do we feel that the mill's kind of like revealing itself again, but we feel that it's like the whole culture and that whole, everything that the mill has been built on is also kind of like reawakening as well. And I think this is what we are in the process of like really, really harnessing now. And this has actually been the majority of the work over this past, particularly this past like sort of like 2 or 3 years, has been to like really delve into, when we talk about the mill, it's like, what do we actually mean by that? What is that culture? How, what's it built on? And
I'm sure a lot of people who might stumble across this podcast will feel the same.
Yeah, exactly. So without kind of like diving straight into that, one of the things that we're starting to do. So what we wanted to start looking at, how can we have something that is consistent, like consistent day in the diary, that we can actually just like start to to say place things around, or like have a place for people to kind of come together and like either meet each other, get to know what's going on, how they get involved, what even we mean by the culture of the mill. And this is where we came up with the last Fridays. And so this was based on between myself, the other co-directors, through to say so many people that we know. It's this idea like of places that don't like run on a kind of like programming where they're just like open every day. It's to say where's consistency of just like the people know to say that there's always going to be like at some point in a month or at some point in time, it's like they know they're going to be able to come down and actually know that there'll be something to see, there'll be a door open and there'll be something to go to.
So what can we expect on the last Fridays?
In October's last Friday, which is the 28th of October,
yes,
I believe.
That's right.
That one's going to be pretty exciting as well, because as bits of the building become a little bit more revealed and like more spaces become accessible, that last Friday will be, at the moment I'm calling it Spaces, Places, Faces.
Okay.
So it's so hopefully I'm going to be optimistic about this. We will, for the first time, so we'll actually be able to, people will be able to actually see into New Islington Mill, which has been completely renovated, and so we'll actually be able to see some like brand new spaces.
Okay, and just for the sake of people who might not know off the top of their head where New Islington Mill is, that's the building on the other side of the courtyard from Islington Mill. It
is, and also sits between Islington Mill and Regent's.
Okay,
and so I'd say that I'm really looking at that last Friday as being like a real celebration of things coming together. So I think one of the things that I'm really, really excited about for that is, apart from just like being able to see what's been going on behind that bit of scaffolding and the possibilities there, it's for the again for the first time ever, there's going to be like a corridor. There's going to be access between the courtyard of Islington Mill and through to Regent's, and so I'd say it's like for the first time ever, like that this like entire site and the entire community is going to actually be like completely joined up. And I think this is where I'm so excited about this, like that, because also it's not so long ago we it's like the warehouses that have been that also have studios. That also is just like a very much just like a part of the whole landscape of the mill and the community of the mill. The
garden,
the garden, and it's like up until recently, those were it's just like seriously under threat as well. So it's like we've had quite a significant. We've had a few like sort of significant moments where there's like it's like a stronger sense of longer term security. On its wider scale. And it's like just being able to actually like look at the future, and it's not just about just one building anymore. It's actually about an entire entire communities, lots of different kinds of spaces and how they connect up. And I think this is where I get really, really excited, because I love those notions of like how you move through a space. It's like what like joins it up, and I think for me that just like the opening of like New Islington Mill being the one in the middle, it's like no longer will it be like a walk around the block, and also it's just like it won't be a case of the studios over one side. It's like never, it's like us never like really being able to like kind of see each other. It's just like it unifies, and it's like unifies like the whole community. And it's just like, and possibilities, it's just like that can open up. I just find so exciting. And because I often think about space, it's like when I'm thinking about spaces and how they link up, it's just like which can really influence just like the tiniest thing of just like, well, would you have a bench in this spot? So it's like if you had a bench in this spot, who like wanders past and why, and like where are the points where people just like stop and have a chat and get to know each other. And it's just like in my mind, it's like it becomes this whole like beautiful choreography of space. But I'm just completely going off topic now. It's just we're talking about last Fridays, and I'm just like dreaming about space now.
Well, we did. we did have a kind of vague topic. Spaces, places, faces.
Yeah,
which is
spaces, faces, yeah.
That's the topic of the last Friday in October.
Yeah.
And just for any listeners who hear this and might want to come along to that, is it open to the public? Is it?
Yeah. I mean, we there will be details that will go out, and I think it's just like, because we are, this is something that we're only just starting. We're just like sort of getting to understand what the rhythm's like, say sort of how. It's just it's just like what it's like to kind of come together on these last Fridays. And I think it's just like, so we're just what we're doing with the last Fridays is like that we're just setting a pace, really. So it's just like, so the first of these like last Fridays, we've set some, it's like the Mill, like us, like the co-directors, the team, the Mill, have kind of set some themes, but the whole idea of them is just like that they are a space, it's just like a physical space and a space and time to bring people together, so that we can actually start to like bring people together who have desire to get involved. It's like people who are here, that's just like they want to like be a part of like the Mill's future. They want to like it's just like the idea that if we're sort of setting this rhythm, the hope is it's like that this wouldn't, the last Fridays wouldn't be something to say that like the Mill, as in like sort of like, just like literally like me or like my co-directors or like the teams to say, it's not that like that we would be then curating every single one. It's just like we're just like sort of starting to open that space to say with that invitation that this would become a rhythm that, it's to say that it's to say that everyone can get involved in. It's to say we've just set a theme for the next 3 just to set the pace, but we're hoping that it's like by the new year, those themes will be like coming out of the community. So it's like those themes, it's like it's just opening up that space for people to actually feel some sort of like can do things in. So it's like can access, can it's just like it's just like do stuff. It's just like as a it's just like in collaboration as a community. So. Yeah, the one in October, because we, it's just like there will be new things to, new spaces to show, and just like to be able to show people what's been going on behind the scaffolding. But, true Mill style, it's just like kind of, we don't like to just show an empty box, because that's just, that's not our style. This is what we, our like sort of way of doing things. Like what we'd love to see, it's like we love activated space, and so the thought of it, and we also love just like things happening in a DIY way, and like it's like being able to try things out. So the idea of what better way to show off a space than it's like somebody doing like a lot of performance in there, or like there being some like it's just like something happening that's activating it. Some it's I think that's and I think that kind of links to sort of like part of the culture that we also like I wanted to like sort of like really bring back as well, because it's like the Mill's always had this sense of any bit of space I'd say it's a canvas, but it's just like every bit of space has a possibility. So it's just like it's that thought of like being able to like try things out. Every bit of like corridor space is a possibility to be society to be transformed, to become like a catwalk or whatever. It's just like, and so I think that I think it also marks like a bit of a again, it's just like sort of like an exciting period. That's just like as new spaces pop up before there's anything like that's fixed on them. It's just like we see that's just like that's a potential to just really play with them, try things out, experiment with them, and that's how the Mills always work. So
the last Friday coming up at the end of October, as already mentioned, is going to be called Spaces, Places, Faces.
Well, it is now.
It is now, good. But the theme for this particular podcast, what we were discussing the other day in the courtyard, I've decided to call that Art in Space, because that's about art and its relationship to the space in which it is created, which was the topic that we started chatting about. And you're obviously very, very passionate about this. And this is something that we have touched on. I think we have talked about this briefly and touched on it in the first podcast that we did. But this seems like a really good opportunity to talk about this a bit more and develop this as an actual subject of the conversation. So, like I said, we both have studios here in Islington Mill on the 4th floor. There's actually one studio between us, but we're practically neighbours.
Yeah.
One of the topics that I'm not like classically trained as an artist. I'm completely self-taught. I didn't go to art school. I went to film school, which is an artistic discipline in its own right, but it's not the same thing as going to art school. So one of the things I've always wondered about is, it is, I think, in a vague term. I'm just going to make the question very vague to open it up to you in the kind of most... You can take this anywhere you want. But, okay, Rachel, what is it about art and its relationship to space that most excites you in general?
So I think there's a difference between how, so for me in general, it's just like how I would approach a space in terms of just like, imagining like, say an artwork being in there or an installation, or it's just like how I would approach it as a space to actually create something for, and then how I approach a space in society, the space that I'm actually creating those things in. And I think there's quite a difference there. And I think it's just like, I often think about space both in like sort of like psychological terms and physical terms.
Okay.
And I think this is something, maybe this is like way back in the day. It's just like when I was at art school, I was doing like, I did a lot of sculpture. So, it's like I was taking up a lot of space. And so I don't know whether that's kind of like influenced me from kind of quite early days, just like what is space, it's just like, because at the time, without repeating the last podcast I did, it's just like, it's just like I was really, really like excited about space, like right from the early days of just like, it's just like activating space, when I was working with installation, it's like, but yeah, once again, without repeating the last podcast I did, you can like learn all about my interest in space and installation from that last one. But it's something that I think about a lot, because I think when so I'd say there's only been, out of the 22 years that I've been a practicing artist, there's only been 1 year in that 22 years, which was like right back in like sort of, it's to say sort of maybe a couple of years out of art college, that I didn't actually have a studio.
Right.
So, it's to say, so in that time I had, I had the luxury of just like, I was living in a house that had like another room that I could turn into a studio, but it wasn't the same. I think it's just like, because it was in my house. And at the time, that was definitely, I needed more than that. And so I think it was really, I found that one particular year, like really informative to actually really start to get my head around. It's just like, well, what is a studio space? Why would you pay to rent a space if you could have a room in your house? What is that difference? Yeah. And so it really, really helped me to kind of get my head around. It's just like, what a studio's for, what difference it makes. It's just like, what... it's this, so I think, for me, the studio space is so much more than just a production space.
Okay.
It's just like, so I think this is where it does come down to, let's just say, the psychological space. And I think it's just like, because yes, I make my artwork in there, but also it's just like, it's where I sit and think. It's where I think it's a space that I can feel comfortable to actually just like sort of lay everything out. I can put things all up on the walls, but I'm not putting them up for presentation. It's just like, it's like basically just like, I treat my studio space like a big, like just a big messy sketch pad, or like a diary or whatever. It's just like, and I think it's just like, because it's my studio space rather than like an exhibition space. It's a private space, so therefore it's a space that I feel kind of like very, very free to actually just like lay myself out, and then just like be able to actually just like sort of contemplate as well. Yeah.
Is it what you were saying earlier about a studio being a site of production, not just a site of production, is interesting to me, because we're here and we've started building a music studio in this space, and over the years I have had studios and not in various different kind of forms. I've had a music studio before when I lived in Glasgow, and then I also had a hot desk, but that was more for visual art and stuff and kind of like computer based things. But having and I've also had like studios in the house, like where I'm currently living with my partner. We've got an attic space, and I have had some of this stuff that we've got set up here set up in my attic space. But it's interesting how I don't know where this comes from, but how the psychology of having a specific space to go to do your work as an artist, it's subtle, but it's quite important, like, because I did have my stuff set up in the attic for a while in a reasonable way, and I was able to create some stuff, but then kind of the desire to do it wasn't necessarily there. It was kind of, and it became this kind of guilt thing where it's like, why aren't you there? Why aren't you doing that? Like, it's all set up now, it's all ready to go. Why aren't you doing it? But I guess I just wasn't feeling it at the time. And now that we have started putting this stuff up here, it's hard to describe, but I do feel like it's a better time to do it here. But I don't know if it's the time is the key, or if space is the key, or the psychology, like what you were saying about the psychological spaces and stuff. I mean, yeah. What do you think,
I think it's a combination of all of those, and it's just, I mean, and that sense of guilt of like when you're in somewhere and you just like, I've not made anything. I've been here and I've not made anything, and that guilt's just like, I'm not being productive. And I think that can be like a massive stumbling block. And I think it's like a massive stumbling block whether you're working at home or if you're working in a studio space or wherever. And I think that's one of the things that I really feel, again, it's just like quite strongly about. It's just like that a studio isn't, it's just like, I think if it becomes a place that's just like just about producing, I think that then there's so much that can be missed. And I think also it's just like, and that can also be like a massive stumbling block, because the thought of like if anyone just like sits me down and goes, it's like, right, produce, I am not going to produce anything, because I'm just going to have just like a big wall come up and just like just goes like, I can't, it's I mean, this is something that I've learned over the years. It's like, because I'm like actually getting into the rhythm of being in a studio, and especially like going into your studio if you've not got something particular that you're working on. And I think those are the biggest kind of like challenging times. And I think those are the times where also you can kind of like feel that guilt, because you just say, why haven't I made anything today? Or why haven't I produced anything? And but I think this is where I think it's just like, it's that building up, it's like what your relationship is with that space. And for me, it was about, and this took me quite a while, because I think of, I would have periods of time which I'd always be like really fearful to come into the studio, because I was just like, I really don't know what I'll be making in the studio today. And then I'll go into the studio and then I'll feel terrible that I've not made anything. I'll feel even worse about myself. And so actually it's just like, that can also create this barrier to like find the motivation to go to the studio. And especially if the studio's a lot colder than like your house might be, it's just like, but I think it is, it's like that building up that relationship of like what you do in a space and how you are in a space. And I think it's just like, even to, it's just like, even if there's nothing, even if you've not got a plan of what you're going to do, it's just like to actually like sort of like make that journey to like just like be in the space, even if you're doing nothing other than staring at a wall, you're still putting yourself in a different state of mind, and you're still having that different relationship. And I think if you, it's to say, if you put that like guilt aside, just like not making or producing anything, or even like having a thought, it's just like there's still that sense of just like, but what I have done today is to say, I have a relationship with this space. And I have this relationship with myself in this space. And I think for me, it's just like, I'm more likely to, to find that if I make that decision to like come down to the studio and I haven't a clue what I'm doing, even to just like sort of sit there and have a brew and just stare at the wall, more likely than not, by the end of the day, I will have stuck something up on the wall, or I would have written something down, or I would have thought a different thought than I would have done if I was sitting at home. And so I think that's where it's just,
on a practical level as well, it's an excuse to get out of the house.
Exactly.
Like, we live about, I looked up on the map, I think we live 2 miles from here. So it's quite a nice little walk to walk from our house to Islington Mill, and it's an excuse to get a bit of exercise in every day.
Yeah.
So there's kind of, I really feel what you're saying there about like the guilt of not producing something when you're in the studio, but that doesn't mean that time in the studio is wasted necessarily.
No, and also I think it is that thing as well. It's just like that. I think that's, you know, that. I think it's just like kind of that. I think it's just like it's good to kind of like sort of break down just like that perception of just like, well, the studio space has to be about production and it has to be about output and it has to be about, you know, at the end of the day it's just like kind of like, you know, like something it's just like that's more on like sort of like a capitalist like model, you know, it's just like that it's got to be about just like outputs and then it's like what's its like sort of like, you know, financial kind of like end and all this kind of stuff. Which I think is just like kind of like, if that's, you know, it's just like if that's the way that you're approaching, it's like what a studio is for, or what a, you know, what a space, what a psychological space to create in is for. I think already it's just like you're denying yourself just like all of the beauty of like what a space can be. And I'm not talking like specifically about like that this can only happen in a studio space. I think that this is also kind of like, you know, it's just like that, what are you actually doing when you're sitting down to create? And I think this is where, you know, it's just like when you start to consider the space that you create in as being just like, it's another part of your being. So it's just like, it's where you go to like maybe think in a particular way, or that you might, it's like the pace of like your brain might be slightly different. You've got maybe some like different sort of stimulation around you, you know, like being at the Mill. It's just like we've got that combination of, you know, what's in our studios, and then it's just like kind of like, you know, who we're going to be like chatting to when we step out the door and all this kind of stuff. And so, and like you say, it's just like, what is that journey there? And so I think, you know, it's to say, and so I think it's to say sort of like, as a, you know, in the studio, I would say it's just like kind of like, you know, even if like someone had a studio and they like kind of never, you know, it's just like they, you know, it's just like they, you know, it's just like sort of they didn't produce, you know, they weren't like kind of like just like producing loads and loads of stuff. It doesn't mean that it's not a successful space. It's just like, it's what it's, you know, what, you know, it's to say, again, I've lost my
I think one of the things that like I benefit from in this space in terms of how this space operates and it functions as a music studio is that it's very much a space for collaboration and to work with other people. So even if I'm not producing something for my own with my own name on it, that's going to come out as this is my thing, I'm still working to facilitate the production of other people's art, particularly music and stuff like that. So I don't feel like there's an element to me coming to this space that's like, I'm quite happy to just like put tunes on really loud because it's a place where I can actually listen to music very loud and just pot around and tidy up and like do stuff like that, which I think is very it's going back to what you said about like your psychological relationship not just to the space but to your own craft. Definitely,
and I think it's like pottering around is a massive part of that, because it's like it's what you're thinking about as you're pottering, you know, and I think and I think it is really interesting, because I think it's just I mean I find it quite just sometimes it's like when I hear it's just like what other people imagine happens in a studio is so far removed from like, for me it's just like kind of what actually happens in the studio. So I think so we're talking about this the other day. It's just like because a few years back I did like a 2-week residency at the Lowry, and it was a like sort of a residency come exhibition, and they'd asked if I would do something that was just like kind of like a little bit more, you know, just like a little bit more performative, and so I asked them to build me a studio in the gallery with a big window on it, and it's just like, and that I would work in there, and that would be my studio for a couple of weeks. And I think it's like what I was aiming for there was to almost just like kind of like just like sort of just you know, just like draw back that curtain on the reality of a studio, and that it's just like there was something about that you know, sharing with people that's just like behind closed doors. It's not just like feverish activity all the time and creating these like amazing artworks, these masterpieces. Or a lot of it was me sitting having a cup of tea, staring at a blank piece of paper, or it might have been just like writing in my notepad, pacing around. Sometimes I would, you know, to say I would get to the drawing board and do some drawings, but it was a lot of, you know, at the, you know, from start to finish, it's like I didn't create a masterpiece. I didn't create one big piece of work. What I did do was just like contemplate.
Yeah.
And it was kind of and it's it was interesting for me because also it's just like it really helped me to understand what my relationship is with the studio. So I became so much more conscious of just like what my actions are in a studio, but I wanted to kind of like run with it and just be working naturally rather than trying to perform. But yeah, I'd also say it's just like it also sent me a little bit like crazy because also it's just like I did feel like I was in a zoo because people were looking in through the window. I was like, oh, what have I done?
Yeah, surely that
actually it's like, did I really want to be like watched?
Yeah. Surely that in itself affects your relationship with that particular studio.
Yeah.
Did you feel a sense of kind of temporariness there that you wouldn't feel here, Islington Mill?
Oh, definitely, yeah. But I think that's the beauty of when because one of the things that I love is like if I like I love going on residencies, and the biggest part of it is just like is about actually like extracting myself from like my completely familiar surroundings and actually placing myself somewhere else. And so I have like, you know, it's just like I will like have a different relationship with the space and the place that I'm in. But I think that's one of the things that I really love. It's like because it's it really helps me to well, yeah, it's just like it's always good to have a change of scenery. But it's just like I think it's just like when there isn't that like sort of complete familiarity, it's like again it's just like sort of like it helps you to like sort of maybe sort of slightly think in a different way or contemplate things in a different way, but also again have that understanding of just like, well, what is my relationship with my familiarity then? And so it's just like, so in some ways, you know, it's just like I might go in a residency into like and work in a different space, you know, it's just like kind of and it always feels really strange because, you know, I mean for me it's just like it's almost like I kind of like pretty much like, you know, it's just like morphed into my room, so you know it's like I know like without looking like, you know, it's just like if I reach out one direction I know that I'll be able to put my hand on just like kind of, you know, it's just like my pot of pencils, whereas I put my hand out the other way, it's just like, and yeah, it's just like I'll be knocking a load of ink over or whatever. But you know, it's just like, but then that becomes like really, really familiar. And so then it's like being in a different space. It's like, you know, there is that that excitement and that discomfort as well. And so I'll often then come back to my own space and go, okay, there's some things that I might want to change in the way that I work in this space, or like I've got a new like appreciation of like this understanding of what my relationship is to space, how I even like sort of like pace around my own room, you know, that kind of thing. You
teach, don't you?
Yes.
Do you have these conversations with your students? Because this is another thing that really interests me as somebody who didn't go to art school, but is yet an artist, creative. Because this is also something that I've been learning myself, among so many other things, about the creative process and my particular creative process. And you said earlier that like so much of the time is spent contemplating, which is a very important thing, but perhaps, I don't know, you only learn the importance, the true value of that as you get older, maybe? Or you're in situations where you don't get the chance to do that? Like, do you discuss this stuff with your students, and what would their opinions on it be? Yeah,
I do. I mean, I think this is, things like this come up in conversations. I think, it's to say there are particular parts of, sort of like, on the course that's like in the students that I teach, it's like there are parts of the course that will like kind of, you know, it's just like cover like sort of like studio culture and studio practice and stuff. But I think it's to say I think there's some things that's like within those nuances that also come up in conversation. Like if you're in a tutorial, it's just like that. You know, it's to say there's like often I will find myself like if you've got a student that's not really utilising the studio space in a way that you just say that it's sometimes it might be through like sort of like shyness of just like kind of like feeling a bit shy to put things up on the wall. But I think again this is where I have those conversations around, you know, it's just like, well, you know, what is the studio environment? It's just like, you know, a wall of a studio is, you know, in studio mode is to say is different to the wall of a gallery. You know, your studio is to say kind of like it's your expanded sketch pad. It's you know, it's to say it's for you to be able to stand back and actually see things to say kind of like from a distance, or see the relationships between things. You know, and as a tutor, I'm coming in and just like, you know, I wouldn't be like looking at something on the wall and going to say, well, that's finished and I'm going to like judge it as being finished. It's like, no, this is a discussion space. This is about like, you know, it's a different, you know, a white wall of a studio is different to the white wall of a gallery.
Yeah.
And similarly as well, as to say kind of like these kinds of things might come up in conversation if it's say if a student is like if they're you know, if they're not coming in to the studio. So it's like, I mean, there might be a whole number of reasons that someone might not feel comfortable coming into a studio, but it is also, it's like I found myself just like having like more I think these kind of like sort of like come up more in conversation around just like, well, what is an artist's relationship with the studio? You know, to say why would you have a studio? And so like going back to all of those things that we were saying before, it's just like kind of like, well, why would you work in a, you know, why would you take on a studio? So it's like, what is it that happens in a studio that is different to like anywhere else? And so I'd say it's just like it's something that I really like to discuss with, you know, society. I mean, it's, you know, it's things that like comes up in discussion quite a lot with students. So it's just like, you know, I will always it's something that's like I always like to explore. It's that like that relationship with the space that you're working in, and the, you know, it's just like, and what, you know, it's just like, and also it's just like kind of like what people are walking into and what your relationship is with it. But I think definitely it's just like, yeah, this also comes with time as well, because I'm coming from this perspective of like 22 years of having relationship to space and having relationships to lots of different types of spaces as well, and I think it's just like this is something that I've learned over the years. It's like as I've got to, you know myself, know my relationship with like, you know, the spaces, places, spaces, the world, you know, like, and but this is where it's just like, because I've been so consciously like something that's like that I've always consciously thought about. It's just like, you know, it's also something that I really, really like to share as well. It's just like, so
moving beyond then art in a studio and an artist in a studio, what other kind of spaces that art and artists and people with a practice can occupy interest you?
I think any space that can be activated, I think is really exciting. So, you know, it's I mean, I've got, you know, I think this is the thing. It's to say, I think it's to say, kind of like literally any space you can imagine something happen in any space, and I think it's just like, you know, it's like you know, it's like you're looking at like the, you know, I'm just like looking at the top corner of the room. It's just like kind of like that is a space that could be activated. Anything could happen in that. I think it's to say, I think I find. You know, I find, you know, it's just like I traditionally show in, you know, it's just like I predominantly show, it's just like kind of, you know, it's just like kind of quite, you know, it's like in gallery spaces, but I get really, really excited about like all kinds of spaces. And in particular, I get excited about corridors. I get excited about, you know, it's just like stairwells. I get excited about, you know, all the possibilities of what can happen in those spaces. And I think that's the thing. It's just like, it's that I love that notion. It's just like that any space can be activated by something creative. It can be activated by something that is on, you know, something that is on the wall, but it can also be activated by like a happening, by just like kind of like, you know, something, you know, it's just like the way that someone moves through a space. It's like any, you know, it's just like any space can be like, any space can be a space for creativity. And I think this is where I get really, and again, you know, it's just like it's more places like open up here. I mean, it's just like, I mean, only the other week I got so excited about our like 4th floor toilets. You know, it's just like kind of, we've not had toilets, you know, it's just like for a while. It's just like there were, you know, it's just like with the renovations, and I got so excited. It was just like, well, I'm going to have like an entire like sort of like morning, which is like performance, like opening up these toilets. It's like kind of, it's not. And that was just to say, because I was just excited, it's like, here's a space we've not had for a while. I'm going to make it an occasion. Like, so.
And what about the grander space of like the whole Islington Mill, as opposed to just like individual studios or even an individual floor? Like how do you conceive of, and what excites you about like the entire Islington Mill, which will be including soon New Islington and then Regent's Estate?
I'm really, the thing that really excites me is just like kind of like how everything connects up. And I think this is like the real desire for the future. It's just like, because it's like we've always, it's like being, it's like one of, it's like one of the things that I have is it's like these, I've got like 20 odd years of memory and experience of maneuvering through all these like spaces and it's just like all the different ways. It's like it's just I think that's the thing. It's just like I'm really excited about it's like how things connect up. So it's just like, apart from like what I was saying earlier about, it's like just what excites me about it's just like literally just like a corridor between like one building and another. It's just like, and like it's I think it is that notion of just like that it's just like, yes, there's people are there are people like working individually in studios, but there's an ecology to everything. It's just like kind of there's this whole it's just like the more I think it's just like the more joined up everything is, and the more it's just like kind of like possibility there is for like collaboration and skills exchange. The idea, I mean, with the mill in its entirety, the idea that's just like kind of like is that you could have so much under one it's just like one roofs. It's just like it's just like that notion that you can be like sort of say you can like pretty much like sort of produce something from like sort of start to finish. Just like sort of just everything's it's just like all the skills are here, all the experiences here. But I think what really excites me is just like sort of like how it's just how that can be more joined up in the future. It's just like, and that includes just like both like like the way that people work in their spaces, but how how people might engage with like some of those more like public facing kind of like things that might happen. I'm really excited to say that there's it's just like the possibility for more. There's more there's going to be more possibility to actually just like try and test things, to sort of like experiment a bit more, to just be able to just like just activate spaces. And
how can I ask you what? I mean, I think I know, and you've been using that phrase a lot during this interview, but could you explain to me what activating a space means? It means to you, I guess, as well.
For me, it's like it's for me it's just like it's doing something that brings a space alive. So for me, it's just like it's it's just it's I think it's that I think it's just like just bringing some life into it. But I think it's just like I prefer to describe as to say sort of like spaces coming alive like through like activated spaces, rather than like talking about say putting on it's just like putting on an exhibition or doing a project in a space, or it's like, because that's too fixed. And I think that it's just like sort of for something to like really come alive, and for like what creativity is as well. I think it's just like that possibility that's like it's just like that creativity could be like literally it's like the way that someone like walks across a room, as much as it could be as just like that there's a big performance going on in a space. And I think this is it. It's just like I like to just think of making it's just like I'd say making a mark, but even just like sort of like being in a space. And then it's like I think it's like that difference between say like it's just like an empty room, and then it's just like how different it feels. It's like even if you don't do anything to it, but it's like you have a few people in there having it, it's just like having a chat, and it's just like enjoying some time together. It's just like it automatically it's like changes the feel of the space. It changes the possibilities of the space. It's so I think that's what I mean by activating a space.
What is your favourite gallery space you've ever been in then?
My favourite gallery space. Take a long pause.
Okay, let me reframe that. Do you have any particular like worst galleries you've ever been in? Oh, this is awful.
Couldn't possibly say.
That's true. Tact. Could also say the Mill, I guess.
Well, yeah, exactly, the Mill.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, my favourite is like Salford Museum and Art Gallery, the room that has my artwork.
There you go.
Currently till February.
Where is that? So the listeners can.
What's that you say? Salford Museum and Art Gallery till February 2023.
Oh, very good.
Very, very nice space.
Yeah. Particularly because it's full of your work.
Particularly because it's full of my work. It was it's a wonderful space to work with and to show. To show in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my favourite space.
Yeah, and you've activated it now.
Yeah, I have activated it. Yeah, I've really activated it.
Cool. Well, we can wrap up there, but definitely very excited for the Last Fridays project that's coming up. And there is one coming up this Friday, which will be the day that this podcast goes out, but then the one, because I'm thinking most people will probably hear this podcast after the day it's released, the next one will be... Can you just tell us the details?
Yeah, so there'll be the 28th of October, which is, that's the last Friday of October. And then,
that's, 28th.
And then, again, it's the Steakhouse. So in December as well, the last Friday, so November, that last Friday will be, it's just like, I think that will be coming up to like Christmas themes. So,
sure.
And...
God.
But yeah, I think just looking out for Last Fridays, we will, and hopefully they will grow and grow, and there will be
on Facebook, Instagram, just the usual social medias.
They will be, yeah. So it's a new rhythm that we're setting up. So it's we'll find ways of reaching people. Hopefully the pink lights in the window will be enough to just draw people in. Or know there's something coming alive, something happening,
something being activated.
Thank you.